Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is the first video on this channel, and so let me just introduce myself, talk a little bit about myself, my history, and sort of my quote-unquote credentials, and then we'll get into it. So my name is John Sierra. I am an avid Tolkien scholar, which basically is a fancy way of saying that I have read the works of J.R.R. Tolkien backwards, forwards, side to side, many times over, cross-referenced things, spoke to other people, learned the lore, learned the reasons behind the reasons and everything to do with it. And now I'm here to answer your questions. Any questions that you have about The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, or any other of his works, including the posthumous ones. Of course, a few of those that I mentioned were posthumous. For example, The Silmarillion, just to show you that I am not messing around. This is a recent copy that I bought. This is not the copy I bought ages ago, but I got this on Amazon just recently. A beautiful illustrated Silmarillion. So that's always within reach. My old copy is somewhere around here. I see Unfinished Tales sitting over there. I'm not going to go lunging for it because it's just out of arm's reach. But anyway, and Lord of the Rings is back there somewhere. Anyway, when I was around in the third grade, and this was in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s, like 1987, around there, right? I was given a copy of The Hobbit to do with a school thing. It wasn't a book report. It was called Independent Reading, where we had this folder. It was called the Independent Reading folder. This teacher is the only teacher that I've ever seen, Mrs. Clark, who did anything like this. She said, we just want you to read. It doesn't matter what you read. It's important that you read. You could read anything. You get the book, you write down what the book's title is, you read for an hour every day. What page you started on, what page you ended on, and then you get your parent to sign it. And one of the books that I did was The Hobbit, which was sort of given to me by my mother. It was her copy. And then I wound up reading it not just once, several times over, because I was very enthralled with it. And I was given her copies of The Lord of the Rings. It was, as 3 separate volumes: The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, Return of the King. I found a hardcover of Unfinished Tales in like the basement somewhere, and I wound up reading that. And this is now getting into like adolescence and teenage years. I eventually bought The Silmarillion, my original my really ratty paperback copy that I know is around here somewhere. But I don't see it. I'll have to gather, maybe for next video, I'll gather all the books together to show them off. But anyway, so it's been a long time. It's been 30 somewhat years since I read The Hobbit. So it's at this point, I've read everything over and over again, and I'm talking about, not just The Silmarillion and Balan, history of Middle-earth, all that stuff, right? And I recently started, answering people's questions, and I initially took to Quora, and this channel is going to be sort of a extension of what I'm doing on Quora, which is answering questions specifically about the Legendarium. And if you have a question and you want it answered, you can leave a comment. I don't mind that. That's, of course, perfectly fine. But if you want your question and answer to possibly be featured in a video, what you want to do is follow the link in the description that is going to go to my Quora, and just ask the question on Quora. It's very easy to make an account. You can use an existing Google account or Facebook, or I think there might be a few other options, and then just tag me in it. You'll see me there in that link, and I will pick my favorite questions to feature in videos. I answer a lot of questions. If you ask me a question and it's what I deem to be an intelligent question that is worth answering, which is most questions. Sometimes I answer the non-intelligent questions too, because they can be very fun. But I usually answer every question that I'm asked if I feel that I'm able to. Sometimes it's something like, who would win in a fight between Sauron and then some guy I've never heard of from some anime or something, and I don't feel qualified to answer a question like that if I don't really know the characters. So anyway, I will put my favorite ones in videos, but I will answer all questions on Quora that I can, or that I feel that I can, to the best of my ability. So since this is the very first video that I'm putting on this channel, I don't have submissions from you guys yet, but what I've decided to do for this first video is to sort of bring up a whole bunch of like sort of my favorite questions that have been asked, or my favorite ones that I've answered, and go through those. instead of going through the previous week's questions. So let's see what we got here. I have them all open in different tabs, and we're just gonna go through them. Okay. So this question, let's see. All right. Some of them will have names of the person that submitted them. Sometimes they will be anonymous. Depends on, how it works. But this was an anonymous one. Are the two blue wizards dead, corrupted by evil, or just fighting Sauron in the lands of East Mordor during the War of the Ring? So, the blue wizards never returned to Valinor, and they were never seen again. And what became of them was one of these great mysteries, though Tolkien did offer up some theories. So the blue wizards, their true names were Alatar and Palando. The elves gave them different names. The elves called them Romastano and Morenatar. They were a bit of mystery even to J.R.R. Tolkien himself at first. Now, he offered the thought in one of his letters that they traveled to Udun, which is to the east of Middle-earth. And I don't mean that there's Middle-earth and then Udun is to the east of it. You see, the landmass that we typically think of as Middle-earth that we see in those maps is actually Endor. Middle-earth is actually much bigger. So to the east of Endor, there is Udun, and to the south, there's Harad. They traveled to these regions. Those were enemy-occupied regions. Sauron had already taken them over. They were either loyal to him, or he had bought them off, or he had conquered them. This was their mission. They went there, and then we don't really know what happened. He said, that they failed, like Saruman, though surely not in the same exact way that Saruman failed. They didn't decide to join Sauron. We would have heard about that. He feels that he felt, at least initially, that it was likely that they just sort of stayed there and became, wizards. They were already wizards, but they became sort of the archetype of what European folklore thinks of as a wizards, that they started cults of magic, for example, and that all the things that we think of from, that are wizards were from these guys. And they basically started the understanding of wizardry and magic in Europe. Because remember that all this is supposed to be a mythological retelling of our past, So there's that. So this was his initial thoughts. And later writings, in a later letter, he said he kind of changed his mind, and he put this, or rather his son did, into the book The Peoples of Middle-earth. And there was a lot more substance to these writings. In The Peoples of Middle-earth, J.R.R. Tolkien and Christopher state that they now saw the blue wizards as being spies, that they went there to sort of undermine Sauron in various ways, and that they didn't actually fail their mission. They actually succeeded in their mission, but they were working behind the scenes to undermine his power. And this was important because it's the main reason that, what we know of as Middle-earth, Endor, was not completely overrun by the Easterlings. Now, they were fighting the Easterlings, but there were a lot more of them that could have come over, and it's likely due to Alatar and Palando, or Romastano and Morenatar, if you prefer to call them that they really helped to undermine Sauron's power, and that they were very important but kind of unknown during the War of the Ring. Good question. Okay, so the next one. Why did Saruman choose to take control of the Shire at the end of Lord of the Rings? Why not use his powers to take a better realm? So it wasn't really about a better realm or the quality of the realm, because Saruman was a very petty person. He was incredibly petty. So to read you a passage from Return of the King, I have it up in front of me here. "Quite capable," said Saruman, "and more than a little. You made me laugh, you hobbit lordlings, riding along with all those great people, so secure and so pleased with your little selves. You thought you had done very well out of it all, and could now just amble back and have a nice quiet time in the country. Saruman's home could be all wrecked, and he could be turned out, but no one could touch yours. Oh no, Gandalf would look after your affairs." Saruman laughed again. "Not he. When his tools have done their tasks, he drops them. But you must go dangling after him, dawdling and talking and riding round twice as far as you needed. Well, thought I, if they're such fools, I will get ahead of them and teach them a lesson. One ill turn deserves another. It would have been a sharper lesson if only you had given me a little more time and more men. Still, I have already done much that you will find it hard to mend or undo in your lives, and it will be pleasant to think of that and set it against my injuries. So, what you see here is it was just all about revenge for Saruman. The hobbits, they gave him the idea. He even made his main base in Hobbiton rather than a politically important town like Moriquendi, which seems like a conscious effort to twist the knife. A secondary reason besides just petty revenge was that he likely thought the hobbits would be easy to conquer. He never took them seriously. And, this last bit, this sounds silly, and it is, but there's a sort of a tertiary reason that Saruman would choose to go to the Shire, because that's where pipeweed comes from. He can gain control of the pipeweed crop, which is an incredibly important money crop, and it is basically the entire economy of Eriador, modern Third Age Eriador, that is. So he had been importing pipeweed from the Shire through unknown channels for quite some time, and there were several barrels of it, which Merry and Pippin found in the Two Towers. So this was a secret vice of his, the tobacco, the pipeweed that was there, and he could gain control of that and have as much of it as he wanted, or sell it for inflated prices. He had become very small. He was a very small evil at the end of Lord of the Rings. Okay, next question. Let's see. So this is, who are the Moriquendi and why are they called so in the Silmarillion? This one, this is an anonymous one as well. Okay. So Moriquendi means dark elf or elf of darkness. These is basically any elf that did not see the light of the two trees of Valinor. So originally, when the elves awakened, there was 144 of them, or at least 144 of them that we know of. They awoke in Middle-earth, and then 56 of them chose to not migrate to Aemon, which we know is the Undying Lands. That's where Valinor was founded. And another 26 of those actually did start the journey, but then did not complete the journey. They set out to Aemon, but they never made it there, and they never saw the light of the trees. So the term Moriquendi, it refers to them as dark elves, but that doesn't mean that they're evil. It's just that they never beheld the light of Valinor. Now, because of this sort of stereotype that dark is evil, the elves that stayed did not appreciate the term dark elf. They did not want to be called Moriquendi. It was kind of a slur to them, and the preferred term that they used was Unmanyar, which just means not of Aemon. The progeny of the original Umanyar became the Sindar and the Nandor of Middle-earth. Good question. Okay, so this one, let's see. Did the Witch King of Angmar ever meet Gandalf? Oh, yes. Yes, he did. And it's probably one of my favorite passages from the book. I think that less people remember this big standoff because it's very similar to the standoff against the Balrog that Gandalf had previously had. It's almost the same sort of vibe, just in a different location and sort of different dynamic. So I'm going to read this passage out to you. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, a great black shape against the fires beyond he loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul under the archway that no enemy ever yet had passed, and all fled before his face. All save one. There waiting, silent and still in the space before the gate, sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. Shadowfax, who alone among the free horses of the earth endured the terror, unmoving, steadfast, as a graven image in Rath Diren. You cannot enter here, said Gandalf, and the huge shadow halted. Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back. Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go. The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fire shone between it, and the mantled shoulders vast and dank. From a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. "Old fool," he said, "old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now and curse in vain." And with that he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. Gandalf did not move. And in that very moment, away behind some courtyard of the city a cock crowed. Shrill and clear he crowed, recking nothing of wizardry or war, welcoming only the morning that in the sky far above the shadows of death was coming with the dawn. And as if in answer there came from far away another note. Horns, horns, horns. In dark Mindoluin's sides they dimly echoed, great horns of the north wildly blowing. Rohan had come at last. So as you can see, Gandalf faced against the Witch King directly at the siege of Minas Tirith, and Gandalf did the whole, you cannot pass bit, only this time it was the men of Rohan that came to the rescue. Not that Gandalf really needed rescuing, but the Witch King sort of realized that he was now having to deal with not only Gandalf in front of him, but an attack from behind, and he just got out of there because he had bigger fish to fry. Okay. Why didn't Frodo just throw the ring into the ocean or some other place where it is impossible to find? So this one came up at the Council of Elrond. The thought of just tossing the One Ring into the Sundering Sea came up, and it was vetoed by Gandalf. The issue with chucking it into the sea is twofold. Firstly, there are lots and lots of creatures in the sea, and we don't know all of their natures. Secondly, coastlines, sea levels, they change over time. There were many at the council who knew this already. The eastern portion of the Sundering Sea used to be the western portion of Middle-earth. They called it Beleriand. It's not impossible to think of the portion of the seabed where the One Ring would lie being raised after all. I mean, that's how Numenor came to be. It was raised off of the seabed. So, if they don't absolutely destroy the One Ring, they're basically just kicking the can down the road. They're putting off the problem to a future generation, and they really wanted to end it permanently. Okay, did Sauron ever learn of Bilbo Baggins's involvement in the destruction of the One Ring? If so, how did he react? Okay, so Sauron was like half a ghost after the One Ring was destroyed. His body was reduced to a pale shadow, which passed away on the wind. He tried to lunge at Gandalf and the captains of Gondor, but the wind just blew him away, and he passed from Middle-earth, leaving only behind the fragment of his spirit that had not been destroyed with the One Ring. Whatever his reaction was, it was probably a lot of, I'll say, colorful language in the black speech of Mordor, but nobody would have heard it. Okay. If the hobbits cannot be easily deceived by the One Ring, then how did Smeagol get corrupted after just seeing the ring in Déagol's hand? So this is a really good question. This was submitted by Abir Ahmed Kingshuk. So it is true that the resilience of hobbits is remarkable, and part of this is that they're just naturally tough little creatures. But the big difference between Smeagol and the likes of, say, Bilbo, Frodo, Merry, Sam, Pippin, and such on, is morality. Smeagol was not a good person. Within just a few seconds of beholding the One Ring, he killed his friend, Déagol. You might say, okay, well, the ring made him do that. It had been lying in the seabed for thousands of years. It really poured on the malice. It wanted a new master. Maybe we can just chalk that one up to the ring. But let's say we excused Smeagol for murder. What came next wasn't any better. He used the ring for mischief. He used it to steal. He used it to hear secrets. He used it to kill. And sometimes he was killing for food, but he didn't exactly hunt animals. He would eat babies. He ate babies. That's something that, a lot of people forget about Smeagol when they see him in the movie, and he's like, "Oh yes, precious, nice hobbits, nice." And it's like, well, you killed babies, dude. You're not a good person. Did Tolkien ever explain why Gandalf chose Bilbo to be the dwarves' burglar? Yes, he did. You could actually read about this in Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth, which is a really good and often overlooked book. A lot of people go from Lord of the Rings straight to the Silmarillion. I always say read Unfinished Tales between the two. It's a good stepping stone and gives you a lot of context to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Gandalf knew Bilbo since he was a kid, basically. He knew his family. Bilbo grew up around Gandalf, or having Gandalf around at times. And he knew that Bilbo was a kid who dreamed of being a dashing adventurer who would, go to distant lands, have a sword instead of a walking stick. And his family, it's kind of the perfect mishmash, the sensible Baggins, the fiery Took. It's the perfect recipe for the kind of guy that Gandalf was looking for. Okay. Why is the ring used in shooting Lord of the Rings humongous? Okay, so this one was submitted by Camillo. I'm not going to say the full name. I should probably just say the first names. Camillo did this. So there were actually a lot of different prop rings used in the movies, but there was one that was really, really big. The large prop ring, I was told it's something called a hero prop, a really big one used for close-ups. And when there needed to be a lot of detail, things reflected in the ring. The scene where the ring was dropped in the snow and Boromir picks it up, that was actually the really big, heavy ring because it was very close to the camera. So this happens a lot in movies. They have props of different sizes, especially with the ring, since it has to be worn by different characters. So, having a really big one to show those details and those close-ups it's called a hero prop. Okay, what was Aragorn doing during The Hobbit? Okay, so if you think about this a little bit, when Frodo met Aragorn in The Prancing Pony and Bree, Aragorn was 87 years old. There was a span of 61 years between the end of The Hobbit and the beginning of Lord of the Rings. Now, if then between the beginning of Lord of the Rings and when Frodo and Aragorn met, there's an additional 17-year span there. So you take 87 years, subtract 76 years from that, and you see that during The Hobbit, he was around 9 or 10 years old. That at this point in his life, his father, Arathorn, had passed, and he did not know that his name was Aragorn or who he was or anything. He was being raised by Elrond, and he thought his name was Estelle. And he would eventually be told everything when he was around 20 years old. But when he was around 9 or 10 years old, he was a boy, and he was doing, probably boy things. Reading, playing with elves, learning, training, that sort of thing. And what's interesting is that, during that time, Bilbo had passed through Rivendell along with Thorin and Gandalf and all the other dwarves, so it's possible that Bilbo might have met Aragorn as a little boy. It was not mentioned in The Hobbit, but it's sort of something to think about. Okay. Here's one of my favorite questions. I love this question. Did Tolkien intentionally make Sam more heroic than Frodo? Yeah. Absolutely, 100% yes, and it was on purpose. Tolkien referred to Samwise as the chief hero of the story. He said that Sam was a better person than he was. He was the most moral character. He was the bravest character, and by that he mean he was always scared, but he went and did it anyway. Bravery doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do the thing anyway. So even when he lost hope, he would just sing himself into greater resolve, and he would sort of just force himself through just sheer will to go forward. He carried the One Ring. He carried Frodo, both literally and figuratively. Sauron wins in any scenario that doesn't include Sam, or more aptly, I should say, Sam and Frodo together. They were the dream team. Okay. When Saruman betrayed his mission as an Astari, why didn't he use his full might and assume his true angelic form to become a true Dark Lord without the One Ring? This was asked by David. Okay, well, Saruman couldn't really do that. And even if he did, he didn't really want to do that. Saruman, he tried to make his own ring of power. That didn't really work out. He changed the color of his robes, There was a lot going on there, but what it basically comes down to is Saruman at no point realized that he was the bad guy. He didn't think of himself as being like Sauron. He was the head of the White Council. He was the head of the Order of the Astari. He considered himself to be the good guy, the big good of the story, the main protagonist. And everything he did with that belief that everything that he was doing was perfectly okay. So he wouldn't really become a Dark Lord without the ring. Now, if he got the ring, he absolutely would become exactly like Sauron. But, he couldn't do this, though. He couldn't call on his true power because the Valar prevented that. The Astari were sent in limited bodies with limited powers and limited memories. They could experience hunger and thirst and pain and fear and weariness, and not to mention the fact that they actually aged. When Saruman arrived in Middle-earth, he had black hair, and by the time Third Age had come around, he was an old man with white hair. He had a little black hair right around his mouth, but that was it. So yeah, Saruman wasn't looking to become a Dark Lord. He wouldn't want to. He wouldn't see himself as a Dark Lord, not without the One Ring. Did Sauron and Saruman continue to exist after their defeats, powerless and non-physical perhaps, but aware? Yes, this was asked by Christopher. You're absolutely correct. Powerless and non-physical is a really good way of putting it. Once the One Ring was destroyed, Sauron, I mentioned this earlier, he tried to lunge at Gandalf and the captains of Gondor. It didn't work. He was blown away just by the wind. He was this looming, intimidating figure with a crown of lightning, and then just gone. His spirit remained, as all beings in Tolkien's world have immortal souls, though Sauron's soul was now incomplete. He had put too much of his soul into an implement that was now destroyed. Sauron would exist forever as a spirit of malice, unable to effect change in the world. Saruman, very similar story. Everything happened very quickly. I'm going to read you guys a passage here. To the dismay of those that stood by, about the body of Saruman, a grey mist gathered, and rising slowly to a great height like smoke from a fire, as a pale, shrouded figure it loomed over the hill. For a moment it wavered, looking to the west, but out of the west came a cold wind, and it bent away, and with a sigh dissolved into nothing. So Saruman, was killed by Grima Wormtongue, and then his spirit rises up. He looks to the west, to Valinor, and he's looking to return. I mentioned this earlier, he doesn't think he did anything wrong. He thinks he'd be perfectly fine to go home after everything he did. He has really got some gumption to think the Valar would take him back after everything he did, but that's just sort of the pride and arrogance of Saruman, and then he just got blown away, and just like Sauron would have to wander Middle-earth forever as a spirit. Okay. If Smaug had eaten the One Ring, would it have been destroyed? No, 100% no. Firstly, there is some debate over what it meant by consuming the rings. This was mentioned, some of the 7 rings were consumed by dragons. It could be literal. They ate it. The fire in their bellies, or maybe their digestive juices, would destroy those rings. It could also mean consumed by fire, that they breathed fire on dwarves that had the rings. The rings were damaged. They melted. They were gone. The One Ring is made of much sterner stuff than that. It could only be unmade at Mount Doom in a volcano, and that's like the only volcano in Endor. And it was even mentioned that even Ancalagan the Black, the greatest dragon ever in Middle-earth, could not have harmed the One Ring. Smaug was a much smaller, lesser dragon than Ancalagan the Black, so there's no way that eating it would work. Although I've always wondered, and leave me a comment if you have a thought on this, if you took the One Ring and ate it, swallowed it, I mean, obviously it would pass through you, but would you be invisible? Would you get drawn into the Wraith world? You're not really wearing it, but it is enveloping you in a way, or you're enveloping it. That's sort of one thing that's always teased my mind. Okay, next question. Would Elrond, Thranduil, or Galadriel have known that Gandalf was an angel in human form? Okay. The only elf that we know 100% for sure knew what Gandalf was Círdan the Mariner. As soon as Gandalf arrived in Middle-earth, he landed on the ship in Lindon, and Círdan saw him and knew what he was immediately, surrendered his ring of power to him. Círdan had one of the 3 rings of the elves, and he said, "This is for you, this is for you, Master, this is for you. You will keep much better care of it than I did," basically. So, and Gandalf was actually the last of the wizards to come, so Círdan didn't choose to give the ring to Saruman, or Radagast, or Moranetar, or Ramastano. He chose to give it to Gandalf, which is interesting. It's not like he knew Gandalf. He was, because He is a Unmanyar. He had never been to Valinor. He started the journey and he never finished it. So Círdan just has some sort of wisdom or foresight that he just knew he had to give the ring to Gandalf. As for the other elves you mentioned, here's my thought. I think Elrond might suspect what Gandalf is, but he never said so. Galadriel, she probably knew, right? She probably had that figured out. She lived in Valinor, you know. And even when Gandalf was in Valinor, he didn't walk freely among the elves. He would appear as an elf, or he would be invisible. But I feel like she probably knew, but she never said anything. Thranduil, he wouldn't have known, you know. He's never been to... he has no connection to Valinor, and he probably wouldn't know at all. Okay, next question. In Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, what would have happened if Frodo was caught by Sauron while he still had the ring? So this is a really cool thing, because Tolkien actually answered this question at one point. What happens if Frodo claims the ring and there's no Gollum? There's no Gollum, and he claims the ring. There's no fight. His finger doesn't give enough. He doesn't lose the ring doesn't go into the fire. What happens next? So what Professor Tolkien said is that the Nazgul were already being sent to Mount Doom by Sauron as soon as Frodo not only put on the ring but claimed it as its own and used its power. As soon as he said, "This is mine," Sauron realized he had been deceived. The ring was at Mount Doom, and that it was a little close to being destroyed. So he sent the Nazgul. So the Nazgul would have arrived. Would they have killed Frodo? No, they actually would have bowed to him. They would have called him Master, and they would have said, "Master, we were going to take you to your new fortress." And they would have scooped up Frodo and taken him to Barad-dûr, and then Sauron would have forcibly removed the ring from Frodo, and he probably just would have been tortured after that. For keeping the ring, even for a little while, Sauron would have tortured Frodo for pretty much as long as as it gave him any kicks. Sam would have died, too. There's no way Sam survives that. Let's see. Why didn't Aragorn or Gandalf fight Sauron at the end of Lord of the Rings trilogy, even though they were both very powerful with great armies behind them? So Denethor, the steward of Gondor, once said something very important about Sauron, and it's very true. He said Sauron leads from behind. He doesn't take to the field of battle. It's the Dark Lord sitting on his throne, not the Dark Lord terrible on the field of battle. Sauron, he lets his armies and his underlings do everything for him, because every time he goes out to battle himself, it doesn't go so well. It didn't go well against Elendil and Gil-galad. In the first age, he was defeated by Luthien. It just doesn't happen for him. He's powerful, but he's not the kind of guy who uses that sort of power against power. He's more about seduction and corruption and manipulation and intimidation. So he wouldn't have appeared on the field of battle. He learned his lesson a long time ago. All right. Let's see what else we got. Why is Shelob a Maia in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings universe? No. We don't really know exactly what Shelob would be classified as, and that's kind of up for debate, but she's definitely not a Maia. Shelob was the last daughter of Ungoliant, and now some people will say that Ungoliant could have been a Maiar, and that's a possibility. I don't think that Ungoliant is a Maiar, but there's sort of two issues with that anyway. One is that the children of Maia are not Maiar themselves. Only Eru can create new angels. Luthien was a Maia. Luthien's mother Melian was a Maia, but Luthien is not. Luthien was an elf. So it doesn't work like that. You can't inherit being an angel. You have to be created as one by Eru Ilúvatar. So even if Ungoliant was a Maiar, that wouldn't make Shelob one. And, the definition of Maia is pretty much any of the Ainur that descended down to Arda. That's the planet. But were not the 15 most powerful ones. The 15 greatest were called the Valar. So I don't see Ungoliant as being a Maia simply because she basically overpowered Morgoth at one point, or Melkor, same guy really. But after the two trees were destroyed, she came after him because he held the Silmarils, and she wanted to eat them. She wanted to consume them, whereas Morgoth had a completely different idea. He just wanted to have them. He didn't want to break them. He wanted to keep them. and she wasn't having that. They got into a fight, and Morgoth did not stand against her. He screamed, and all of the Balrogs came to his rescue and sort of fought her off. So the fact that, him being a Valar and being intimidated by her, I think she couldn't possibly be a Maia. And also the fact that it took all seven Balrogs to fight her off. She was not one of the Valar because we know who they are. We know there's 15 of them. We know their names. We know all about them. So I always thought she's something else. She's probably from beyond the universe. She's an eldritch horror, so to speak. So whatever Shelob is, she's half Great Spider. She's half whatever Ungoliant was. She's not a Maia. Okay, who is older, Arwen or Galadriel? When I got asked this on Quora, I typed up a whole answer, but I'll just say very simply that Galadriel is Arwen's grandmother. So what do you think? Who do you think's older? And one more. This is one of my favorites. What is the Flame of Udun? So this is when Gandalf was up against the Balrog, and he made a speech. And I'm going to read that passage out to you. "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." So if we break this down, the secret fire, and notice in the book it's actually capitalized, that refers to something called the flame imperishable. That's the light of creation that dwells within Eru Iluvatar. Eru's god, and the flame imperishable is sort of the Holy Spirit, so to speak. So Anor, he mentions he's the wielder of the flame of Anor. Anor is the elven word for the sun. So Balrogs are creatures of shadow, but they're also creatures of flame. And Gandalf is basically boasting. He's saying, my flame's bigger than your flame. I'm like the sun. And then lastly, he says flame of Udun. Udun means hell. It can also be translated as a tumno. There is a valley in Mordor called Udun, which means hell. A tumno was Morgoth's first fortress. Now, although Udun or Tumno does mean hell, the fortress is actually what Gandalf's referring to here. He's basically saying, I know what you are. You're a Balrog of Morgoth. I'm aware of what I'm getting into here. I know what I'm up against, and I am not afraid. So if you were to take Gandalf's speech and sort of translate it into a little bit more modern, understandable script, you would get something like this. You cannot pass. I am an angel of God. My flames are as powerful as the sun. You cannot pass. Your evil magic will not triumph, servant of Morgoth. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. So, basically, it's boasting. It's letting the Balrog know who he is without just spilling it for everybody else that's watching, because it was supposed to be a secret who Gandalf is. But he's using the language that the Balrog would understand, but say Aragorn. Well, Aragorn might understand it a little, but Frodo certainly wouldn't. None of the others in the Fellowship would understand that sort of language. So anyway, that's all the questions that I have today. So I would like to basically do the same thing to take next Wednesday. I will do another video. We'll take like the 20 or so favorite questions that from the previous week, which is this coming week, and answer them. I'll also make sure to gather all my books together so I can show you guys all the books and everything. Leave me comments, absolutely, but if you want your questions answered, definitely follow the link in the description, go to Quora, ask the question on Quora, and tag me on it. And of course, other people might also answer, and I will answer every question that I have, but I will pick my favorite ones for this video. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next week.